let's be honest here, Rudeus is doing what any rational, reasonable person does right after they've been broken up with. They focus on self-care, they take that protein, they get swole, and then they happen to run into their next love interest. Hello everybody, I am Phenom Sage, and welcome back to another Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation Season 2 episode review. Today we're going to be talking about Episode 2, The Forest in the Dead of Night. And I have mixed feelings about this episode. On one hand, I did really enjoy some aspects about the character writing and where Rudeus and Sara ended up by the end of the episode, and I will get into that, of course. But this also strikes me as the kind of episode that a lot of source readers will end up watching and say, "No, they rushed it. They cut out all those incredible extra scenes and character moments. How dare they not make this one-to-one, sentence-to-sentence adaptation? It's ruined!" Which I always find pretty funny to listen to, but this episode in particular definitely struck me as something that I think I would have rather seen fleshed out a bit longer. This plotline of Sara eventually coming to trust and become attached to Rudeus, and more importantly, just Rudeus finding this salvation that he does by the end of the episode. Because last week, I talked about how no shot this stuff that's been going on with Rudeus is just resolved so quickly. There's just no way they do it that way. This is more of a moment of respite than anything else for his character, and we'll still have to deal with this in the future of the story. And I was right about that last week, but it does seem like this week took the opportunity to resolve a lot more with his character in a way where you can now say more assuredly that a lot of the stuff that he was going through is now resolved. Obviously, I think a bunch of it will still end up coming back and resurfacing at some point or another in the future. I think even the next episode, we might get some conversations and dialogue about what went on these past few episodes. But for all intents and purposes right now, the biggest obstacle inside of Rudeus feels like it has been overcome. And I kind of wish that there was a bit more time to really let that play out. I especially felt that way during the scene with this character called Soul. I assume that's his name anyways, they kind of only mentioned it one time in the background, but basically there's this scene with this character, this fellow guild member who's taking on these jobs, and he calls Rudeus out for this facade that he keeps putting up at all times. He's not really opening up to anyone, and this guy, Soul, is taking Rudeus's behavior and the way that he's conducting all of these guild missions as an insult to him and everyone else there who are taking on these jobs more earnestly. And what he says here, he says a lot of things in this scene that really hit the nail on the head with what Rudeus is actually thinking and doing and feeling at this current point in time. Rudeus can't even respond to the things that he's saying because he knows they're all true. All he can do is give the fire punch smile and then pretend it never happened. And I really like this scene in general, but it feels like it kind of came out of nowhere for both of their characters. Like, I have no idea who this guy is, and suddenly he's getting this intense and accurate read on everything Rudeus has been going through this entire time. It definitely felt like something that should have happened after having more encounters and more screen time with this dude, so we actually have more of an understanding of who he is and where this is all coming from in the first place. Again though, I say all of those things, I say all of these complaints, but this was still probably my favorite part of the episode. It was just so interesting and weirdly satisfying to see somebody break through Rudeus's shell and elicit more than just his fake, overly polite responses. The animation in this scene as well was really goddamn good. They did a great job of capturing the mannerisms and the acting of both characters in a way that felt really convincing. And the positives and the negatives of that scene pretty much encompass the positives and negatives of the entire episode for me. I do think that a lot of what happens in this episode would have been better served if it came after more build-up and more time laying these pieces in place to pay them off later. But at the same time, there was just a lot of really nice character stuff that I did enjoy a lot. I really liked seeing Timothy's character, this genuine, kind dude who has to make these difficult decisions, Suzanne's character, who's angry at Rudeus for risking his life before she's even grateful that he saved Sara's. Just these little details that elevate these characters higher than they would have been otherwise. Because let's be honest, almost everybody in this team, besides Sara, are likely going to be smaller, more contextual roles to this arc specifically. Most people probably won't even remember their names by the end of this season, and I think that's fine, but it is nice that even in spite of that, the writing in this arc is always thinking about how to give them more character even in these smaller moments, and I think that's something that Mushoku Tensei overall just does really well. But the real character spotlights here are, of course, Sol, Sara, and Rudeus. With Sol, I basically already said everything that I had to say about him, but I was pretty relieved to see that he was a lot more than just the douchebag archetype that I was expecting him to be. I really love characters who are willing to admit their mistakes and humble themselves if they need to, and obviously he was still pretty antagonistic, but at the very least, there's a lot of little moments in this episode that show that he ultimately does have a heart. He's not just some uncaring asshole, he doesn't disregard everyone around him, and I think that's pretty important to show in an episode like this that would otherwise paint him entirely as the villain. With Sara's character, there is about as little for me to say specifically because I find her role is a lot more interesting when you tie it directly into Rudeus' development. But one thing I will say about her character that kind of surprised me a bit was how they handled the nuance of her relationship with Rudeus, because let's be honest, everyone who watches anime knows that this is the tried and true classic known as a tsundere. But the way it was handled here felt a bit more fresh than what you usually see from these kinds of characters. I like how the time in between episode 1 and episode 2 is actually reflected in how she acts around Rudeus, because I was expecting her to more or less act the exact same as she did last episode until we do finally get that pivotal moment that makes her warm up to him. But in reality, I like that in this episode, you can see that she was gradually warming up to him even without that pivotal moment. You can see these little scenes and pieces of dialogue where she's trying to learn more about him, or she's inviting him to take this job with their group, or she's inviting him to celebrate with them after the job. And it's all of these little things that make me like her character a lot more when there are these little moments and little pieces of camaraderie that endear you to this relationship. And that kind of leads us into Rudeus' character himself, because again, this episode really is dedicated to kind of bringing him across that big hurdle that was still preventing him from interacting with people like a normal human being. And part of me does wish it was handled over a more careful amount of time, but another part of me just really appreciates how Rudeus is written in this episode. I'm a big fan of this trope where a character saving someone else is also what allows him to be saved in turn. I just got finished watching Sangatsu no Lion a few months ago, and I was thinking about that the entire time while watching this episode. Rudeus to me has always felt like a character who craves the validation of the people around him. It's just something that has always informed his character, both back in the real world and even now after he's been transported to this one. It's what saves him from despair at the beginning of season 1, it's what puts him back into despair by the end of season 1, and it's ultimately what brings him back again in this episode. Rudeus is somebody who wants to feel like he belongs and wants to feel needed by the people around him. It's why Eris turning her back on him and abandoning him hurt him as much as it did. And it's also why in this episode he can't even rationalize why he's going out to look for Sara in the first place. It just feels like something that he needs to do. By the end of the episode, when he does find her, not only does it validate him being here in the first place, the fact that he was able to save somebody's life, but it also validates the larger scope of what he's been doing this entire time. It validates all the work that he's been doing to locate his missing mother. And it ends up giving this glimmer of hope that eventually he will find and he will save his mother as well. Thank you guys so much for watching. Join the Discord server in the description if you want to hang out and chat about this episode, or Mushoku Tensei, or anything else in general. I'm sorry these reviews have been going out pretty late in the week. I'm honestly pretty busy and overwhelmed in my personal life right now, where if it were any other series, I probably wouldn't even be doing these reviews at all, but it's Mushoku Tensei, man. I promised you guys I would review this series to the end. I want to review this series to the end, and I will definitely continue. You just have to bear with me if they end up being later than usual. I hope you're having a great day. I love you all so much, and I will see you in the next video.